for coming, and I'm going to hand over the mic to you.
Thank you. So good evening. And I want to thank Lori and the Philly Photo Art Center for hosting this event and hosting this really incredible exhibition, Welcome to Camp America by Debi Cornwall. I'm very excited about tonight's program. And I think that the topics that emerge out of the work they're so important for us to have these discussions right now, and to think about the broader connections that we need to make around issues of human caging, torture, and general mistreatment and punitive turn and the way that we govern. So with that said, I just want to say a little bit about the exhibition and introduce our panelists and give you a schedule for how we will organize tonight's conversation. So you are surrounded by really incredible photographs that are part of an ongoing conceptual project by Debi Cornwall called Welcome to Camp America. Debi considers herself a conceptual documentarian because we often think of documentary in very realist and often journalistic ways. And I think Debi, given her background, wants us to think much more critically about what is the text, what is evidence, and how we as a public engage the image and the text and also testimony. So what I didn't know until talking to Debi and seeing her bio is that she actually was a lawyer for 12 years, a civil rights attorney who worked on wrongful conviction cases, primarily U.S.-based cases of people who were wrongfully convicted in U.S. prisons. Out of that project, she decided, out of that work, those 12 years of work, she moved into photo-based work. But her challenge was how to translate the legal questions that had driven her 12-year engagement into questions and commitments that a broader public could engage, and how might the visual serve as a means to think and to work through ethical and legal questions. So her book, Welcome to Camp America, that contains the photographs above, also comprises photographs, text, as well as court documents, military documents that, as she says, reveal the bureaucratization, of state violence. So she's looking at how the legal, how the administrative violence gets actually legislated through court documents. Her book, Welcome to Camp America, which she's holding right now, is an art book that's available on radiusbooks.org. So we are honored to have 4 panelists who will engage with Welcome to Camp America and to extend the conversation beyond just the exhibit. So I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists now, and then we'll start off with a conversation between Mohamedou Ould Slahi and Debi Cornwall, partly facilitated by me. Then following that conversation, we'll have Christie Charpentier present, and then Emily Abendroth, and Debi will wrap it up talking to us more about her process. So we are really honored to have on Skype Mohamedou Ould Slahi, who was born in a small town in Mauritania in 1970. He won a scholarship to attend college in Germany and worked there for several years as an engineer. In 2000, he returned to Mauritania, and following that year, he was, at the behest of the United States government, he was detained by authorities and rendered to a prison in Jordan. Later, he was sent to Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, and then on August 5, 2002, he was sent to Guantánamo Bay, where he was subjected to severe torture. In 2010, a federal judge ordered him immediately released, but the government appealed that decision. He was cleared and released on October 16, 2015, 5 years later, and repatriated to his native country of Mauritania. No charges were filed against him during or after his ordeal. He is the author of Guantánamo Diary, a memoir of his experience that was also serialized in Slate magazine before being published in 2015 when it became an international bestseller. Following Mohamedou, we will have Christie Charpentier, who is a federal defender in the Capitol Habeas Unit with the Federal Community Defender Office for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. She represented Gitmo detainees and can also speak about the roles of lawyers and the media around Gitmo, as well as the evolving standards of decency and influence of public discourse on the justice system and decision makers. Sitting next to me is Emily Abendroth. She's a poet, a teacher, and what I love this is she's an anti-prison activist, not prison reform activist, but anti-prison activist. Much of her creative work investigates state regimes of force and power, as well as individual and collective resistance strategies. She has been awarded residencies at McDowell Colony, the Malay Colony, and the Hetland Center for the Arts in Marin, California. She was named the 2013 Pew Fellow in Poetry, and she's an active organizer with the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, which is a grassroots campaign to end life without parole sentencing in Pennsylvania. She's also the co-founder of Address This, an education and empowerment project that provides innovative social justice correspondence to individuals incarcerated in the state of Pennsylvania. And the media projects Lifelines, Voices Against the Other Death Penalty. The Lifelines art exhibit is currently traveling across the state of Pennsylvania and will be throughout 2018-2019. So we'll begin with Debi and Mohamedou, your conversation.
Mohamedou, first of all, thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's great to see you. And Mohamedou, good evening.
Good evening, thank you for having me.
It's the middle of the night for you, so we're so grateful you're able to participate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. So Nicole told us a little bit about your story and how you ended up in Guantánamo. Can you share with us a little bit about how you survived? What were your strategies and how did you come to write your memoir, Guantánamo Diary?
So good evening. I mean, is that good evening in where you are or
Yes.
good afternoon? I don't know. I give you both. So I came to the radar of the United States intelligence community following a phone call I received from my, I say far cousin, because I want to be very as far away as I could after that event. And so he called me using the phone number that was registered somehow to a person who was related to the late Nubia. And I was completely unaware of this. So he called me and he wanted me to help him send some money to his sick father. First, before I go on, could you guys hear me very well?
Yes, we can. Thank you for asking. Everyone okay? Yeah.
Okay. So, as it turned out, the U.S. intelligence, then I lived in Germany, they called the German authorities, and they asked them to do something with, I don't know what they asked them exactly, but my understanding from what I know today is that they asked them to arrest me. But the German government refused to arrest me unless provided with evidence that I broke the law. That evidence the United States couldn't provide. Since content of the conversation was just that. He asked me to help his father. His father was really sick, and I helped his father. And so When I moved to Canada in late 99, this guy decided to cross to the United States, whom, by the way, I never met. I don't know, we are not in the same city. And then the intelligence community in the US, they said, now, okay, now we know what happened. So this guy, who has been living in Germany, we know he received a call from this person, was related to there, so he must be the one related to this operation. One more time, the US government asked the Canadian people to arrest him. Canadian people were much more cooperative with the United States, much more than the Germans, almost like cheerleaders. However, there was a problem. They couldn't find anything. I did not break the law, so I couldn't be arrested. So the Americans and later, the Canadian, they said we could lure him outside of this country into a place where there is no law, and then we could kidnap him. And then they arranged something with the Moderator government so that my mother would call me. She would tell me that she was sick, and then they know I would always come back to Moderator when she's sick. And that's what exactly happened. My mother called me, she said she was sick, and then I went back to Mauritania, and before I reached the country, I was kidnapped from Senegal. So that's how I was taken to Guantánamo Bay. In Mauritania, I wasn't taken right away because there was 9/11, there was nothing. So, but I was stripped from my passport and I was forbidden to resume my life or go anywhere. So I decided to find a job and work. But 9/11 happened, unfortunately. And then after 9/11 happened, the United States government permitted itself to completely ignore the law and treat people completely outside the rule of law. Not that it wasn't like this before, but now after 9/11 it was much more blatant and much more gross. And so I was taken into question, and to make a very long story short, I was asked to provide them my cousin because he was wanted. And I really told them I couldn't, I don't know where he is. And they said, it's too bad, we take you. I was very scared to answer. And I said, okay, you take me to the US. I was like, okay, US, there is law in the US. As it turned out, there is no law. But because I watched like War on Order, and I watched Married with Children, Murder Show, and Columbus, I thought just like Germany, people have judged to go there, and said I didn't do it, and let me go home. But they had a much more like plan for me. They said to stick to Jordan. I was like, what? So, what do I have to do with Jordan? And I was sent to Jordan. I stayed there for 8 months. And I was sent to Baghdad. And of course, I did not know about the war because I was taken in before the war. But interrogators are very clumsy sometimes because the way they ask questions, they give me information. So in Baghdad, they said, where is Osama bin Laden?
They're asking you in Bagram Air Base.
What?
You've been in custody since before 9/11. They're asking you, where is Osama bin Laden?
Correct. Yeah. So I was like, look, there is a war somehow, and they took over Afghanistan because later on I found myself in Baghdad. I did not know I was in Baghdad. So how did I know? They gave me water, and then I read the water bottle, and it was Russian. It was in Cyrillic. and I couldn't read it then. That's why I was so angry. The first thing I did, I learned how to read Cyrillic writing. And so I said, this is somewhere in Russia. I know, but where in Russia? And then a little bit by little bit, I had this guy. He wanted to convert me, and I was so happy. I was ready to be converted. And then he told me about the Bible, and I told him I know everything about the Bible because I read it from cover to cover. He was so happy with me. And then he was talking about heaven. I said, what is heaven? He was very frustrated because I did not understand what heaven was. And then he said, like sky. Then I said, okay, I know sky. He was, yes, I understand now. And then he told me I was in Afghanistan. And the rest of the story, so I was taken to Guantánamo Bay, and I was happy because I was told that Guantánamo Bay is under the complete control of the United States of America. And I was really happy to be under the control of the United States of America. I was mistaken. In the beginning it wasn't as bad. And then that's when I decided to write my diaries as like a shout in the dark. That shout in the dark about 8 years to reach people like yourself.
When you started writing your diary, Mohamedou, were you writing it for yourself? Were you writing it to pass the time? Did you imagine an audience reading it one day?
So, first of all, I love to write stuff. So even though I'm not a literary person, I chose like science because it was easier. But I really love to write. When I was a child, I used to write short stories. And I used to write poetry about like freedom, about equality for all. Isn't America like the oldest like democracy today? I really don't understand this because I think America with this awesome power they have, they could make a very big, they could make like difference when they lead the way of respecting human rights and dignity. And as it regards me, I'm very happy. I am not where I am, I'm very happy. You know? Do I wish to have my rights restored? Yes. Do I wish for the US to lift those unfair and unjustified and unlawful sanctions? Yes. But I'm happy. You see outside the street, I don't have to speak to anyone. I can say, you know what, I'm going outside, thank you very much, nice to talk to you. That's really good, a very good feeling. That it is my choice to sit with you. It is my choice to talk to you. No one is forcing you. And that choice I have, and for that I am very grateful. Not to the United States of America, I'm grateful to Allah. And I'm grateful to people like yourself, and to people who defend human rights and help those who are still in custody.
Mohamedou, I know it's very late there. Will you be able to stay on Skype for our Q&A after the other presentations?
I didn't hear you.
So I know it's very late. Are you able to stay on Skype while our other panelists present? Because I'm sure people would like to ask you questions.
Of course, that would be so cool.
Okay.
Just to talk and go away.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for, I know, what time is it there? Okay, so we're going, I'm going to pass the mic to our next panelist now, okay? Thank you so much.
Good, thank you.
is Cristi, and I am a federal defender, and I brought some images, and there's the first one to give you a little context for the work that I came into to work with Guantánamo detainees, and why kind of we got into it. So I'm very, Mohamedou, I hope that you can see some of this, because your last comments about what the power of the government can be in the U.S. Really hit home, because my day job, and there are a couple of other folks in the audience who do the day job with me, is as a habeas attorney. And so my work is, as a constitutional litigator, to look at the fairness of a trial, to look at the fairness of a death sentence in particular. I represent almost exclusively capitally sentenced men and women in Pennsylvania and around the country. So when Guantánamo opened up in 2002, and the first of the men were there, there was a lot of litigation that happened that didn't involve public defenders. There was a big rush by learned folks in different firms who, in many respects, were hired by some of the more wealthy people, or the countries that contained some of the people that were swept up in the big push to put people in Guantánamo, which reached its peak of population close to over 800 in 2004-2005. Just to put that in perspective, 13 years later, it's to 40. So in the world of capital habeas litigation, this was a constitutional true crisis that went like wildfire. And as an attorney who's been doing constitutional litigation in this area for quite a long time, we really had never experienced anything that moved that quickly. So, power of the government, this is how we got in. So I'm just going to move through some slides. In dealing with wrongful punishment, I just wanted to show you those 8 men that you saw. I don't know if you remember last year in Arkansas. There were 8 men who were scheduled for execution in a span of 10 days. For the first time ever in the United States. Our office got very busy with this. I've been representing 2 men in Arkansas since 2005, but none of these men. So when the drugs were about to expire, which if you watch this in the United States, you'll see that that's often a motivating factor for states to accelerate their warrant signing. The drug access is a big issue, and if the drugs are going to expire, you get a rush of warrants. In Arkansas, their solution for the expiration of their first drug that was going to expire at the end of April 2017 was to schedule 2-a-days on 4 different days between Easter Monday. I'll just leave that irony there for you. Following the biggest capital trial that Christianity ever had, through the end of April. And they killed 4 of these men in that 10-day period. They didn't kill 4 others. Move on. So that was last year when we came into this. Is the next slide? This gentleman, I just want to tell you, my office was working all night last night with our colleagues in Texas. This was the man that was killed in Texas last night. This is Mr. Danny Bible. And I put him up there because these 2 pictures we're not seeing much in terms of, when I thought about this topic, I thought about what the images do and don't do for my day-to-day job in this area. And it's really hard. We walk away from all of these images. Often that's all you see are these headshots. And that's a hard story to work from. So in my world, we find the words to try and create some empathy or sympathy for a man who's, if the factual story like Mohamedou was going to tell you, we don't have that factual story. So we have a lot of bridges to create. So this is Mr. Bible. And may I have the next slide, please? And I'm going to foretell something for you all. And again, I don't have many images to work with. This is a man called Charles Rhines. And he lives in South Dakota. He's one of 3 men on death row. We're working very hard right now to have a circuit court of appeals in the federal system accept another appeal from a pleading that we did which alleged profound homophobic bias among the jurors in his case. And you might have been seeing that in the press recently. There was, I think, the most read op-ed in the New York Times this last week. Cert was denied at the U.S. Supreme Court Monday. It feels like this week at the U.S. Supreme Court for our office, Alba and Brett can attest, this end of term stuff at SCOTUS is our biggest time of the year. It's like tax day for tax accountants, I imagine. Every time they breathe or sneeze is important, and the end of June is often very tough. It was tough in our office these last couple days. So that's Charles, and one back, but this is what he makes. He makes dream catchers, right? So as you go through your travels, think about Charles. We may have some things to do with him when it's time to ask for mercy. Moving on, no better images, but now I have my heart. I wanted to put this up here only because it reminded me when I started seeing these images, real and fake, right? Or from the protests and from the camps of the children at the border. I don't know about my other colleagues here, but I had a strong flashback to what we were dealing with in the early days of Guantánamo. And I was buoyed because the images were there. There was outrage, as I think I said to my colleagues more than once. Outrage is both our fuel and our tool for getting some action here. And I think that was really effective. And again, moving on, it reminded me of images that were passionate and passion-provoking when, and I know if Mohamedou can see this, when he first arrived at Guantánamo. So you remember this image, perhaps, right? With the infamous dog cages at Camp X-Ray, right? There's with the earmuffs, with the eye patches, with complete lockdown. This is where it is now, and there's some issues going on with how perfectly it will be preserved. And of course, this image speaks for itself with the kind of terror. But the fact that we can see those from the inside of this camp to the outside, even to me, who's been on the inside many, many times, is remarkable because you can't bring out the images. And that was really what struck me about the intensity of this conversation we're having. Where do we find them? So moving on to the next slide. Mohamedou told you his story of arrest, and there are 785 different stories that the different men can tell. Both of the men that you'll hear about as I roll through some slides, and really I kind of wanted this to be active and peppy, as though you were sitting next to me on my phone and I'm showing you pictures and we're talking about what it is. But this was a very common way that men in Afghanistan, in particular, got into custody. You'll see that this was a leaflet that was dropped. I don't know if anybody of you ever had a chance to see it, but this was the turn-in leaflet. Get wealth and power beyond your dreams. Help the anti-Taliban forces rid Afghanistan of murderers and terrorists. You can receive millions of dollars for helping the anti-Taliban force catch Al-Qaeda, which would be Al-Qaeda, and Taliban murderers. This is enough money to take care of your family, your village, your tribe for the rest of your life. Pay for livestock and doctors and school books and housing for all your people. So this was a tool to incite people and different tribes to carry over any kinds of grudges, any kinds of to do exactly what it said, to get funds, right? And start to name people, name names. He was the guy that drove the truck for the Taliban. He picked up the trash for the Taliban. This is the guy that I think he was a teacher in the school. And that was enough, right, for these folks to get names and for the forces, once the war started, when we were engaged, to sort of pick people up en masse. The U.S. government. Yes, the U.S. government. So here we go. Again, sort of peppy moving along. This is written, and you can see it's unclassified. Everything I'm showing you now is unclassified. But this is really always sort of powerful to me. In the wake of a Supreme Court decision, you'll segue back to my first comments about after the camp opened, right? Rumsfeld and Cheney thought, we'll put them where the law can't get them. Well, nothing inspires, right? That constitutional moment and rallying of lawyers like that kind of we're putting you beyond the reach of the law. So there was litigation for what rights in a U.S. court does a person like this gentleman, who's a person from Uzbekistan who was arrested in Afghanistan, right? What rights is he going to have at a U.S. military base to challenge the correctness of his detention? What habeas corpus, if any, will apply to him? And in the wake of a decision that said they're not beyond the reach of the law, a huge decision in which now retiring Justice Kennedy wrote a very powerful concurrence. These were the little pieces of paper that were written on by the men, like Mohamedou, like my clients, who said, I think it scrolls down up to the next, does it scroll down that prior slide? Is there anything on the bottom? The translation I had meant to put in there. But basically it says, I am this gentleman, and I was arrested, and I have never been an enemy of the United States, and I want to challenge my detention. So this was the first filing in the case. This is the pro se habeas petition. And I'll tell you, the military folk saved every paper that they ever got, and they made these filings, right? And that's how the cases got started. So when these papers started to be filed, the lawyers started lining up. And again, my public defender colleagues who are here will relate to, and then they got to the end of the pile. And the big firms had taken all the Kuwaitis, and the big firms had taken all the Yemenis, and all of the Saudis, or most of them. And there were leftovers. The European guys had been taken by big blocks of lawyers. And so when it got to the 37 guys who still didn't have attorneys, and now we're getting into late 2005, public defenders were asked to get involved down in Washington, D.C., and our defender at the time said, we'll step up. And I was happy to have been, part of the team that was put together to deal with this. And we had 5 guys from 5 different countries. So this is what we did. We figured out how to get ourselves organized as a legal team, figure out the 5 languages that we need, and go through all of the security clearance to finally land at the leeward point, combined bachelor's quarters of Guantánamo Bay, Cuba. This was the part of the base that at that time in 2005 was like tumbleweeds. Hadn't seen anybody really stay in these quarters for a very long time. Things changed over the 10 years or so that I traveled back and forth there. But it was really dusty existence. And this is where they put us. And the next is the boat ride. There we are. You can see how happy I am that first day. And what happened was, on this very first trip, here's an Oregon public defender, here's an Oregon public defender, and here's a Philly public defender. The base is set up as a leeward side and a windward side. So the Guantánamo Bay is like a real thing, and you have to cross it every day. So every morning, the lawyers who were habeas lawyers, and again, the militaries put things together. The court said, you're going to have lawyers down here, you're going to figure out a way to get them there. That's what they did. So they stuffed us over on the leeward side, and every day we got to the docks, and we took this boat across the bay, and then fully escorted, we went to where we had to go. So, and I just again, now I'm just wanted to just show slides. I look at this and I laugh. You can see my style hasn't changed very much, except while I went to Guantánamo, I wore a much longer skirt, and often I would cover my head because my men were presumptively pious, because that was just a safer way to proceed. So that was me on the boat. This is a photograph of that leeward side. So, in fact, that might even be you, Brett, in this picture as we're walking down one of the very few places we could walk freely without an escort. The bay is here, all the big base with the camps and the activities and the families are all on the other side of the base. You see sort of the airstrip there, and we were allowed in the mornings. I went every morning religiously down this road, and there was one little beach where we could go and swim. And that's what we did. It was a very monotonous existence, but for the work with the men, and then that was like an explosion. And then on either side of the day, we cooked for ourselves on the fire pits, and we had this. And I give you this context because I think that's what we're doing here. It was very creative lawyering under really interesting and different circumstances. And, you know, finally we had, right? Sometimes we laugh. You've heard of the Innocence Project. We at the Capital Habeas Unit sometimes call ourselves the Guilty Project because our focus at the end of cases often becomes the nature of the penalty. And here, boy, things were wide open. We were walked way, way far back into what the heck is going on here. And how did so many men, and these particular men, get here? So, you can't really see this. But what I wanted to do was just show you that in sort of, as we figured out how to make the case based on what we were reading from classified and unclassified documents, what was the case that they had against our men? Were they all wrong way Charlie, scooped up by, you know, through leaflets, or in this case of this young man, afraid when the bomb started and literally ran into the arms of the Northern Alliance? We had to just figure out what to do. And quickly, as litigators, you know what we realized? That there was going to be very little relief in litigation. This was a diplomatic problem. We were hired in as lawyers, but we had to figure out how to make this work out of court, or our guys were sunk, right? So that's what we did. So in light of the current circumstances, I kind of looked a little bit wistfully. I hadn't looked at this stuff in quite a while, and I realized that I just wrote a letter to the Honorable Barack Obama. And I just did that, right? We had to do that in April of 2009 because at that point, our entire focus to get these men off the island was in the diplomatic arena. And without very much experience in doing that, we sort of created it as we went along. So,
feds not counting all of these things that yours points to as others carceral systems in our midst. Of those, 1 in every 10 of those people is serving a death by incarceration sentence or life without parole. So it's not a nominal number of people, right? Like 1 in every 10 people in that system has been sentenced to die inside that prison. It doesn't look, it's not equally distributed who's receiving that sentence. So 75% of those people are black and brown prisoners in particular. And that is a political sentence outside of a legal schema. Like who's getting arrested, who's getting charged under what terms, etc. And we were very much trying to think about how, with Lifelines, like how do we make a cultural and media intervention into that at the same time that we're sort of as activists fighting for policy change, and as family members fighting for policy change, and as friends and colleagues of folks who are serving these sentences. And we've tried to do that in a bunch of different ways. A couple of things, other things that are over there are these various pamphlets that we did. That project is done in collaboration with 8 folks on the inside who are themselves serving death by incarceration sentences, both men and women. It's deeply co-created with them. Like, so we often are the face of the outside co-founders, but that project is as much those people, far more actually, in terms of the framing, the theory, the intellectualization. Like, I think sometimes what we were also trying to break was this way in which those suffering those sentences get framed as strictly having stories, which that in itself is an improvement from the way we often see them, right, but are not also regarded as activists in their own right, who are producing some of the best theorization around what mass incarceration is and how and why we need to end it that is coming out of there. So the name death by incarceration is coming from folks on the inside who are telling us this is the more accurate way to name what's happening to us and to others, etc. And then the thing we tried to do more recently was this, that we've been working on for the past year, is this show that we called How Are We Free? And so this one is one image from that, and it was done where every individual on the inside was paired with an artist nationally on the outside, and did a long collaboration with each other. Like we had already collected a bunch of writings from the folks on the inside that was asking them to sort of visualize first incarceration, but then also what freedom looked like to them. And they wrote very beautiful, long things, a bunch of excerpts of which are printed in that thing. And then we asked the artists on the outside to collaborate with them to produce 3 pieces one of which was a portrait, one of which was around visualizing incarceration, and one of which was visualizing freedom. And we came up with that title, How Are We Free? To name, I think we were trying to just to sort of, I know Nicole like works on like aesthetics of incarceration, and like Debbie has been thinking about that too, like how do we not just have the images that are only barbed wire, right? And we wanted like the double play of that title to be, one of the lines comes from David Lee, who's part of this project, who was asking things, how are we free when our schools are completely underfunded? How are we free when we have no access to healthcare? How are we free when the bond conditions that are true of many of us actually in this room, and not only those who are inside? But then also to ask alternately, how are we free? Like, what are the ways in which we create micro spaces of liberation for ourselves despite the conditions that are happening to us? So really trying to look at, not deprive people of the agency that they actually have so brutally created for themselves in all of these various kinds of ways. I think thinking about like how Mohamedou was saying that thing of like, I'm happy, right? Do I want my rights? Yes. And at the same time, have I made a world for myself despite all this stuff that has happened upon my body? Yes, also. So we were really trying to like honor that fullness of human personhood and potential. And then a few connections I just want to make. And honestly, you can even just scroll through those. I'm not doing like kind of one at a time. If you want to people can look and see a few of them. In between, there's going to be quotes from the individuals who did it. But I'm going to say some of these things while those play, just for the sake of time and for moving us out. Things that I was specifically interested, just also as by way of conversation for ourselves, in this was, we are really working for death by incarceration stuff to, which I thought might be interesting interjections in the space, to move away from a strictly innocence guilt dialogue, that like death by incarceration is one of the pillars of mass incarceration, even if it's only 1 in 10 people who are serving that, it is what makes its continuance possible, right? And it is representative of all of the economic and racialization of how mass incarceration persists. And if we narrow ourselves strictly to talking about the most palatable innocence cases, without saying how is what we have done to people who have done something also unjust, also unpalatable, also an unbearable situation, then we're going to miss the boat, and we're actually going to keep mass incarceration entirely in play while letting out a few petty dime drug dealers. And our families and communities will continue to be gutted and destroyed. So we are really, really interested as a narrative shift in like moving out of innocence dialogues. The other tiny thing I'll say about that is very, very often we have a particular face of what victims look like, and most people who actually suffer harm, especially in like the city we're in this moment, most people who perpetrate harm have also been victims of harm. That the very same people are circulating through the prison system and suffering some of the most intense conditions of both poverty and violence. And I want to include in their violence at the hands of the state and the police, so that they have both. So when we just imagine that these are these like totally polarized by like completely separate categories of people, we're doing ourselves an injustice. And that part of what the Coalition About Death by Incarceration has really been trying to do is like, so many of our members are folks who have lost one family member to violence in the streets and another family member to a life sentence. And that they are ready for some versions of safety and healing and transformation that do not involve only locking people up for the rest of their lives. They're ready to meet the people who cause something else and imagine something else together. So that was one thing I was interested in. I'm interested in the international aspect, that like the US prison system that we have now is one that we are exporting globally as a model. And that, so for instance, the only person who actually got charges and prison time coming out of all the Abu Ghraib scandals was first a guard at SCI Green, which is a Pennsylvania prison on the west side. And he learned those techniques not at Abu Ghraib, he brought them from SCI Green to there. So also thinking about how these translate across spaces. And that like Abu Ghraib, like some of the people who were staffed there were then asked to go Gitmoize Guantánamo, right? So that these are actually cross conversations that are happening transnationally that are reciprocal. They're not only going one direction, and much of the so-called exceptionalism of Guantánamo is standard par for the course in U.S. prisons, and that there are certainly some exceptional things about it. Like I don't actually want to. People are doing incredible work because of wild snafus of the legal situation those folks are in, and many of the legal situations of U.S. prisoners here are not that more comparable.
We have black sites in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then the very last thing I was sort of interested in, and maybe as just like, maybe Debbie will talk about this, which I hope you will, is in the book version of Camp America, it has a text in it, which I thought I was so sort of moved interested impressed about someone being severely beaten by a CERT team. So this emergency response team there, right? Because they are refusing to be compliant in their cell. What you don't know in the book, and what you didn't know often when this was first published, was that like the person being attacked in that context was an American soldier performing a drill that the other soldiers didn't know they were performing a drill upon, and they beat the hell out of him, basically, because they thought it was someone else, right? And so I think what I'm interested in thinking about, that I think that does so well, is like how toxic those environments are, not only for those who are imprisoned in them, but for those who are performing all kinds of roles in the context of them. Like that soldier is not in good condition right at this moment, and many of these sort of guards who in the middle of Pennsylvania who are in various states of economic poverty and who are performing as their job service oppression are not leaving those job sites without toxicity and going back to their own homes. So I think one of the things that is interesting to me about the way you choose to also try to show the general atmosphere, the impacts on the general atmosphere, is also trying to think about if we can't move people, if there's failure and refusal to identify with those who are being charged, then maybe you can also think about the entire ripple effect of those who are carrying out all of the other